This is a Momentum Media production.
Nerd alert! Property Nerds, the home for data-driven property investors, where we uncover Australia's hot and cold markets, latest headlines and trends.
Hello. It's Arjun here, and I'm back. It's been a minute, or to be precise, it's been just over 2 months. And for those who are tuning in for the first time, I'm the host here of the Property Nerds podcast, also the founder and CEO of InvestorKit buyers agency. And I've been away for a couple of months, healing, surgery, some pretty crazy stuff to bring people up to speed. I had open heart surgery. The procedure's called the Ross procedure, and not a pretty sight at all, right? So it was pretty full on. So I've been away for the last 9 or 10 weeks now, and recovery's been intense. Had 2 hospital rehospitalizations, if that's the word. And yeah, look, I'm feeling much, much better. I'm still not at that strength and of pre-surgery where I can, lift my daughter up. She's 10 months old, so she's still beyond my weight capacity of what I can lift. And it's like a moving target, right? So she's growing and I'm trying to heal. So it's this like thing that's getting away, but the healing trajectory is looking pretty quick over the next few months. I know that I've been, given a second chance at life. And so that's something I'm really, really grateful about. And one thing I'll always say is now that I've learned about this and the importance of getting your checkups, I always want to just make sure I shout that out whenever I can. If you feel a slight bit of breathlessness, if you don't even have any symptoms and you just want to make sure you get yourself checked, maybe you get a bit of dizziness if you're sitting down, you stand back up or sit down again, or you get tired, fatigue, bit of chest pain, any of these things, these are all signs to look out for the heart. I didn't have much symptoms. I was very lucky on how I came across mine. But yeah, it was a major, major procedure and had to get it done. So I always tell people, look, go get an ECG, follow it up with some blood tests, get your cardiologist to refer you for an echogram, a bit of checks of that. It's not really a painful test or anything like that. It's literally like an ultrasound of your chest. So I'm just going to be someone who advocates for that because I've seen how it's impacted my family, my life, and getting told that any minute now or a couple of years at best case, you may be suffering from heart failure and no longer be with us, heart attack, stroke, all these things at risk. And to hear that at 32 is scary, and to be able to go away and have a solution for it in Australia, it indeed is the lucky country. So, yeah, look, I'm very lucky and I'm pumped to be back. And during my time of absence, how good has Jung been? Jung's our senior research analyst. She came on here in the Property Nerds show. Very grateful for her. And look, it won't be the last of her because the mail, the reviews, the email, the messages, the YouTube comments, everyone just saying they loved hearing from Jung and her clarity, her ability to break the complex things down to simple things. Absolute star. So I'm very grateful for her time on the show, and I'll be definitely having her back on the show more often. And if you've been away for a couple of months or maybe not heard Lee's voice for a couple of months, she's embracing full-time motherhood. So no longer the co-host here with me on the Property Nerds show. And our little Ruby's grown up really, really quickly. She's 10 months old and we'll be celebrating her 1-year birthday in a couple of months, which I'm pumped for. So hopefully I can pick her up and hold her then after what would be 4 months plus of not doing that. And that'll be special. So lots going on in the Paliwal household, lots going on the Property Nerds podcast and shifting and changing. And there'll be some more exciting things in the works as we're preparing for the introduction of a new co-host. So that's in the works. I can't reveal too much just yet. It'll be a few months away, but in the interim, I look forward to having Jung on, many other guests on, and sharing some of our research and data, which you all come here to tune into. And so that's a bit about what's been happening. I'm back, but in today's episode, we're going to get into the world of due diligence. And I've been getting a lot of questions on due diligence because this is an area many people are fascinated by and wanting to learn more about, because it's that final piece of the puzzle, right? So there's looking to your strategy and trying to decide what you buy, how frequent you buy, price points you buy at, your finance approach, savings approach, end goals, reverse engineering, that strategy. After that, you go to research, which is where you buy, why you buy there, what options do you have to buy, market level down to suburb level, going at it from that view. And then the last part, which is one of the areas that people make a lot of mistakes in, is due diligence. And due diligence is the specific property you buy, right? So what we're unpacking here in terms of due diligence is, what is due diligence? Why is it important? And what are the pros and cons of following it? And then third, the InvestorKit due diligence approach. Now, you have to stay tuned to the third part, the InvestorKit due diligence approach. So stay tuned towards the end where I'll go through that, because that is the due diligence approach being taken by the Buyers Agency of the Year for 2024 and 2023, the first in Australian history to go back to back. And I want to share that with you in this episode, going deep into many of the points covered on that list so you can buy yourself the best properties on the market or off the market, and say goodbye to the ones that you don't want to buy that don't fit this mold. And this will help you just get ahead in your investing journey and protect you down the track. So let's kick off with what is due diligence. It's a broad term, but essentially, if I use my own definition, not the dictionary, my own definition of due diligence is checking things further to avoid mistakes, right? Because people can look at due diligence at different depths. Someone could say due diligence was missed because an aircon was not working. And in their eyes, it's a mistake that's cost them money. Someone could say due diligence is a property bought and the property is impacted by floods. Someone could say due diligence is a property purchased and it's right next door to a cemetery. So resale value. So people have depths. Like some people think of resale value, some people think of high cost mistakes, but owning the property, and some people think of low cost mistakes. So that's why I define it more simply just as something that needs to be analyzed further or is missed that can cost someone money that's unexpected, cost someone time, stress, pressure, unexpected, right? So that's really what is due diligence. It's doing your extra checks to avoid costly mistakes. Now, why is it important? Well, the first part is costly mistakes. The second part is peace of mind. And the third part is how the asset can do not just performance for you today, performance for you in the future. And so let's break that down a little bit. When people are conducting due diligence and say there's 10 properties available for sale at one time, your goal is, A, I'd like the property to do well for me and better than others in the same suburb. B is I'd like to have the property and avoid small and large costly mistakes. And then C is if I'm buying this property and I need to let go of it, I don't see the same problems as I am today, right? Because that's the thing. If the deal's too easy, if it's troublesome on the way in, it usually is troublesome on the way out. Now, yes, property's long-term, and there are very few houses that haven't gone in value, even the ones that say fail due diligence, they still go up long-term if the rest of the area has. But there are challenges that come along the way if you're planning to exit it, planning to list it for rent, or you're planning to just hold a property and then get revaluations too. And so when I mentioned earlier there's pros and cons to due diligence, there truly are. So let's say the pros, reduced costs and mistakes, but the cons can be longer purchasing times, less options, higher price points to pay, because a property on a main road is cheaper than a property not on a main road. But then a property on a main road, when you're reselling it, will have someone else question the same thing. Hey, that's on a main road. I don't want to be by the noise, or I don't want that to impact me. So the problem sticks. But the pro in your eyes could be, well, I got it for cheaper. So you have to be someone that weighs that up. I prefer just to rule it off and just cancel it. But some people like to go, oh no, I'll consider it and maybe pay less. Look, that's not the InvestorKit way, but it is something that people consider for their own journeys, which is I just pay less so I can be in the suburb, take advantage of the growth rates, and it costs me 200K less or 100K less to be on that main road. I'll live with it. That's in each to their own principle. I'm going to share you what we do and don't do. Now, when conducting due diligence and when creating a list, it's really important to separate opinion from fact. And to do that, fact is something that's hard to bring up just because someone may say at a rental open home or a property for sale, I didn't really like this property because the house is a bit small. And in your mind, that's deemed as fact. right? So this is difficult. In the world of property investing, you could have 5 different opinions at the open home, and all 5 of them are facts because they're a live buyer sitting there. So then how do you separate opinion from fact? So we decided to take an approach using a statistic called days on market and using another statistic called resale value growth. And doing this, we outlined and did a deep project where markets were in hot periods, flat periods, and cold periods going back many, many years. And then we looked at resale values in the same suburb, similar timed properties in purchase timeline, similar sold in resale timelines. So it's buying and selling in the same cycle. Super tough exercise, by the way, so manual. And then looking at it also from no renovations, because we don't want those X factors to come in. Someone's renovated the home completely and the resale value shifted. We're then looking at time to sell, because if the time to sell factor is right and you consider something of impact, let's just say it's a property where you go, I don't really like this part of the suburb. Okay, this part of the suburb is the part of the suburb that we don't really like more. It might be a bit rougher or something. But if that's selling just as quick as the other part of the suburb, and all it is a variance of price on the way in, if you pay the fair price for that patch of the suburb on the way in, the suburb growth rate is similar and you've tracked resale values of both patches of the suburbs, and then it doesn't take much longer on a value of time, no outliers on days on market, then all of a sudden you don't really have a due diligence issue. You just have a preference or an opinion issue. And this is the part where people need to separate it. Look, we'd rather be on this side of the road or facing this direction, or preferences. Don't get me wrong. Things that they can put on the real estate copy to make it feel like the advert is now a better property, selling a better property. But if we're constantly reviewing time to sell, resale values, and comparing them and benchmarking them in hot, cold, flat periods and within the same suburb in different parts of the suburb, with some that are impacted with due diligence and some that aren't, you end up refining the list. And what I'm going to share with you is some points from the list where we've noticed have inflated time to sell, have in many circumstances impacted resale value, and as a result, you want to try and avoid. Now, due diligence isn't black or white, because someone may see a busy road, but it's not as busy as people think. So, for example, I'll use a case study here. If you go to the street of Wangara Scenic Drive in the suburb of Bargara, Bargara, and you go to, it's the city of Bundaberg. When you look at that, the map would suggest a couple of bus stops on that street. The map would suggest a yellow line in some parts of maps that you review, therefore could be busier. And then from there, you start thinking it's a long road. It's not an inner streets road. Hey, busy road. We shouldn't buy there. But then when you look at that and you look at the sales, some of the most premium priced homes are on that street. It is not a busy road if you go on the ground. The locals don't feel it's very busy. And you also have days on market not rapidly shifting because of properties on that street versus not on that street during the same periods of market. So that is clear that that's not a due diligence issue on that specific street. But then if you find others that have the same functions, and they could be a due diligence issue in another area, the map bus stops, the yellow line on Google Maps, or the busy road, the speed signs, anything, long road, suddenly it's an issue in another city. So this is why due diligence is not black or white, it's gray, but you have to comment it to each rule, meaning it's an acceptable risk. So for example, the signs of a busy road might be a fail on Wangara Scenic Drive, but you're still accepting of that because of the deeper dive to say, no, it's not an issue. So when you're looking at a due diligence checklist, have your 20 points, 21 points, 30 points, whatever you want to have. But when you have it, don't think a cross or fail is an absolute fail. Think of it as a cross, fail, maybe, and unpack everything deeper. That's the key. Okay, so now the cool part, the exciting part, how do we unpack actual due diligence and find those things that are issues? I share that with you, but now it's what are some of those issues? Let's go through this list. So the first one is a unit versus a house. Straight away, that alone can be a due diligence issue because there are many areas where the data is proven in those areas where the units don't perform as well growth-wise, the units take longer to sell, longer to rent, and it's in the same suburb as a house which grew faster, performed better, and rented easier. So that's the first one. The next one was extremely odd-shaped blocks. So a huge triangle block. But here's a catch on that. When we found those extremely triangle-shaped blocks and we added land size as a filter, it didn't become an issue. So what I mean by that is if it's an extremely odd-shaped block and it's a small block of land, it then makes the due diligence issue worse. But if it's an extremely odd-shaped block and then the land is bigger, for example, cul-de-sacs have that bigger land towards the end, but they're odd-shaped as you go in, then all of a sudden that bigger land, even though it sounds like a odd shape or look like an odd shape, that bigger land makes up for the odd shape and there's still space for the kids to run around or anything like that in that area. The next one was less than 3 bedrooms. If you have a house and you're buying it and it's got less than 3 bedrooms, that does have longer days on market in many examples we reviewed than those that had 3 or more bedrooms. Multiple extremely small bedrooms. Now, small was an interesting definition, so we had to go deep into looking at floor plans across thousands of properties. And what we looked at was the majority. So if you had a 3-bedroom property and you had 2 bedrooms of the 3 that were extremely small, so an example of that could be like a 2.4 and a 2.6 times 2. Firstly, you've got an issue there, but if 2 of those rooms are that tiny and then you've got your 3rd room that's kind of big, that also was a days on market factor. Train tracks and train stations in extremely close proximity. Bus stops right in front of the house. Busy roads. A house right on the roundabout, like right on it. And it has to be a busy roundabout. A property directly facing a major school with a car park right in front of it, and it's right on there. Flood-related impact, so things like flood checks, naturally. Bushfire checks, but again, some mappings of a bushfire were interesting, where the trees are all cleared out, and then there's houses there, but the mapping's still the same as if the trees were there. So look at the days on market deeper. Major and unapproved alterations, so huge unapproved pergolas or huge unapproved garage conversions with bedrooms assumed there that are priced in as bedrooms, or you think it's a great deal because you've got a 4-bedroom but you paid the 3-bedroom price and you're sharing. These some of the things to consider. Now this one was interesting. Housing commission rates in a neighborhood with greater than 20%. So large complexes in an area, and if you had a house right opposite the large complex, that was an example. So I can give you a clear example. There was a suburb called Manly West in Brisbane, and there was a very large housing commission complex right on there. And I don't have the street coming to my mind right now. I think it could be Kelly something maybe, but it's or something else, but it's right on there. And there's a house right in front. And I can recall seeing that house, and I checked back in. I was like, beautifully renovated, amazing home, but right at the gateway of a huge complex. Had over 180 days on market trying to sell that, and it was well priced. But then everything else in that suburb was selling within 2 weeks. Nuts. So it just shows you, renovated well, well priced, beautiful home, great suburb, fast selling suburb. That's just an example. Highways in extreme close proximity. And again, this is a gray area because if you go to the city of Townsville, there's a suburb called Douglas, which is tucked in near highways. But then Douglas is known to be right there, and it's always been there. And the days on market of those properties aren't elevated. The resale values are close to it, but it's not far from that highway. People are making conscious decisions to accept it. For example, it's got the university, it's got shops, and it's got all the river walks and the precincts, modern homes. So in someone's mind, they're like, well, I'm accepting of that because I have all of this, and therefore this doesn't become an impact. So that's where an example of due diligence being grey, you need to look at it in more detail. But then you go to some suburbs of Brisbane and the highway on the north side's right there, and then days on market's extremely elevated when you're right there. Resale price impacted, as an example. Cemeteries in very close proximity, industrial areas in very close proximity, major power lines and substations in very close proximity or in direct or high levels of view. This is a fun one. People won't like hearing this, but swimming pools, right? swimming pools impacted days on market. You'd think that'd be an enhancer. For some markets it was, but for other markets where that wasn't common or the norm and wasn't seen as an enhancer, people were reselling properties with swimming pools, and it took much longer because people thought of the prospective maintenance. Investors might have avoided it anyways. These are some just of the things to consider that made that property take longer to sell or have more things included in that sale. We also factored something called vendor discounting. So properties where they had multiple discount events show in their sale history, that was also considered when making this list. Now, this is just some of the list here. The list can go on. We capture over 21 points at InvestorKit. And then beyond that, we're looking at micro due diligence, which is the suburb. So this is like data, right? If some suburb has like a 70 or 80% investor rate, that's also an issue because that can swing in vacancy rates quite quickly. So this is just an example of due diligence to consider. And if you use some of these tips in due diligence that I've given you, firstly, you can use these tips to avoid houses that may have these areas or issues, unless it's that gray area that you can comment on it and feel comfortable. Secondly, you can avoid reselling at higher time to sell, which leads to higher discounts. And you can also make sure that you are protecting that property for its growth rates, its rentability too. And then lastly, when you use due diligence and you've crafted yourself a checklist and you're clear on it, you can actually then mold the number of points you want to and don't want to or don't mind being unticked. And the reason why that's important and you have that control is then you'll control the amount of properties that flow in. Because if you have every one of our points ticked, then you're going to have far more rejections of properties whilst your friends or others around you or those you know, or even professionals that you thought you could work with and they purchased much quicker for someone else versus us, say, taking 2, 3, 4 months to make a purchase. Well, at least you know that we're trying to tick every box. So that's some of the things that goes into building the buyer's agency of the year here in Australia. Correct due diligence, a due diligence checklist that's deep and covers all these things, but not just having a deep checklist, actually focusing on just the things that are impacted by days on market, vendor discounting, resale across hot periods, flat periods, and cold periods. That's what you want to avoid. You'll notice I didn't have a what direction is this facing? I didn't have a 1-story or 2-story. I didn't have the building materials. They're not major factors here in due diligence. So I didn't mention 1 bathroom versus 2, because guess what? 1 bathroom properties that are priced as 1 bathroom properties with 3 beds, and even if they're older, and they're priced accordingly, they don't sell or take any longer to sell, and they sell for the amounts that they should sell for. Hot, cold, flat markets, they do well. So when considering all of this, you can use this podcast here today, this episode here today, and look at it from a perspective of what's not that important anymore that I used to think that was important, and what is more important, and how can I avoid that or manage that, and consider the black, white, and gray. Create a checklist for yourself, search, or if you'd like us to do it and take care of it for you, just jump on investorkit.com.au and go from there.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.
Game over.